What I'm going to do is talk to you about some basic ideas about the mind. And because this is going to be just a 50-minute kind of overview, we'll then take the reflection time, then have questions and answers. Of course, it's going to be take-home points. And so as Paul mentioned, I work in a field called interpersonal neurobiology, which is an interdisciplinary view which basically combines many different aspects of science together into one common home. So what we try to do at the MindSight Institute, which is the home for interpersonal neurobiology, is we try to paint a picture of the whole elephant. With the old Indian fable of certain disciplines study the toe and the knee and the trunk and the tail and the tusk. We would like to create a home where all sciences can come together. In fact, it began with science, but as you heard, it's also extended into various fields of contemplation and religion, the arts, music, poetry. All sorts of different ways of knowing have incredible value that build a picture of the whole elephant. So because of that, of course, I'm just going to paint some of the elements of that image from interpersonal neurobiology that I think would be a useful starting place for us to have a conversation. So the first is to say, with climate, mind, and behavior, you're all the experts in climate, and you know what the word behavior means, you know, how people act. And of course, we want to make the actions of people's behavior on the planet equal to making the climate better, and if we can, reversing some of the issues, not just about climate change, but the comment was made about the diversity in the room, and the biodiversity of our planet is so crucial. Reducing toxins is so crucial. There's so many issues in addition to climate change, but we're going to focus on the climate. But then there's this middle word, the mind. And for myself, you heard I was trained initially as a biologist, but then I went into medicine, and then went into pediatrics, and then ultimately into psychiatry. And what was amazing to me in a field which is the caretaker of the psyche, and you know the definition of psyche is what? It's the soul, the intellect, the spirit, and a synonym is also the mind. And so the mind, though it has a synonym with the psyche, actually in the field of psychiatry doesn't actually have a definition. And I've now asked 98,350 mental health professionals. I'm going to stop when I get to 100,000, but I'm not there yet. I've asked them around this planet from every field of mental health, have you ever had even one lecture on what the mind is? And what do you think the response has been of this almost 100,000 sampling of psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, nurses, people in the various occupational therapy and educational therapy, music therapy, dance therapy? It doesn't matter. The number is always the same. What do you think the number has been of mental health professionals that have had even one lecture saying what the mind is? Zero is often the number, but when you average it out, it's about 2%. 2%, 2 to 5%. Now, this is not about mental health, but you've asked me to come here to talk about the mind, so I need to be giving you informed consent that the caretakers of the mind actually don't even define the mind. And then I talk to people in the field of psychology, close, wonderful friends of mine, and they don't have a definition of the mind. And they say that's why we're psychologists. We're studying it because we don't know what it is. And then I talk to dear friends of mine who are philosophers of mind, and they say they don't have a definition of mind because it's too big to define. And if you defined it, it would be a problem because you'd be limiting yourself. So to begin with climate, mind, and behavior, the name of our gathering, I have to confess that in these various fields, philosophy of mind, psychology, study of mind, psychiatry or mental health, the caretaker of the mind, there is not a definition of the mind. It's not like there's warring definitions, but there is no definition. So for me, when I was doing a research grant through the NIMH back in 1989, I wrote my grant to study the development of the mind. And I got the money, believe it or not. I didn't know there was a definition of what I was studying, so I studied relationships. I studied the way parents interact with children so that children's mental functioning, like their ability to regulate their emotions, their ability to think clearly under stress, to have resilience. Everything we know is mental, thoughts, feelings, attitudes, intentions, beliefs, the intention to carry out a behavior and the ability to carry that behavior out, right? Those are all mental experiences. We would agree with that. It doesn't define the mind, but it describes mental processes. So they gave me the grant and I studied it. And then in 1990, you may remember, it was the beginning of the decade of the brain. And I brought in some scientists that I've been working with from 40 different areas around the university, from representing about 12 major disciplines of science. And I said to them, we're going to ask one question. And that is, what is the connection between the mind and the brain? Simple question, right? The decade of the brain is beginning. People are getting very excited about looking beneath the skull at the structure and function of a healthy living brain, right? That's what we do once we move from PET scans to MRIs and all that. So it's a really wonderful technological advance back in 1990 now, 21 years ago. So the question I asked this group that I asked to join together, what's the connection between these two? So where did the group start? They started with the brain. So what is the brain? Let's make sure we're all on the same page together as we begin this conference together. What is the brain? Well, it's a collection of cells, right, called neurons, and their supportive cells called glial cells. And just to look at the neurons now, we don't know much about what the supportive cells do. We know a little bit. But the neurons connect to each other in a spider web kind of connection. And those connections are called what? Synapses. Right now, if I get you to actively participate with me, you're actually going to remember better, because when you study memory, if you activate your brain rather than sit there passively, you'll actually learn more. So this is a reason to do it, not that I'm drilling you. So synapses are the connections among neurons. And the reason we care about them is because we think there's something about mental processes that's directly related to synapses. So if you ask the question, what is the origin of synaptic formation, you'll be asking basically what is part of the influence of mental processes. We haven't defined the mind, but we know there's thoughts, feelings, consciousness, stuff like that. So they could define the brain. Collections of neurons interconnected in a spider web-like formation by synaptic connections with supportive cells. And how many neurons are there in the brain? Up in the skull? 100 billion. There's 100 billion exactly. And if I'm an average neuron, how many connections do I make to other neurons? 10,000, right? 10,000. So imagine, since the way the brain works, this is like your fastest neuroanatomy and neurostructure, neurofunction lecture. The brain works by action potentials, which are basically ions flowing in and out of the membrane. It's like an electrical current going down the long length called an axon. And at the end, it releases what? A neurotransmitter of various kinds. It's a chemical. So basically, electrical energy is flowing down the axon, and at the end, the electrical energy is converted into chemical energy. This is a really important point. It's energy flow. Energy is the capacity to do stuff. That's what physicists define energy as, capacity to do stuff. And in this case, it's the form of electrical energy and then chemical energy. And then when the neurotransmitter goes across, it's met by a receptor that turns on the downstream neuron or turns it off, and basically it's electrical energy again. So if you had to summarize what the brain is all about, in the simplest phrase, you'd say it's a set of interconnected cells that allow electrochemical energy to flow. That's it. Okay, so that was pretty easy. No, the thing is, the thing in the skull, it's totally related to the stuff in the body. So you just need to know, when I use the word brain, I mean the embodied nervous system that's distributed throughout the entire body. Now, I say usually the embodied brain, but my daughter says that's redundant and I shouldn't repeat myself, because the brain is extended throughout the whole body. So why say embodied brain? But if you just say brain, people get really upset and they say, well, don't you care about the body? But then if you say body, they say, oh, you're from California, you're one of those body people. So I'm stuck. If you come up with a better word, please tell me, because wherever I go, especially if you have a teenage daughter at home, you get in trouble. So embodied brain, but let's just call it brain for simplicity. Okay, so it's totally connected to the body. Your hormonal system, your immune system, the whole 9 yards, the whole thing is connected. We're going to talk about it as brain. That's the easy part. So, 1992, this group is meeting. We say, okay, let's get to the mind. Climate, mind, and behavior. This is now 1992. What's the mind? Well, these are very thoughtful, caring, loving, devoted, incredibly focused, accomplished scientists. No agreement. They could say what's mental, thoughts, feelings, consciousness, subjective experience. Sure. What is the mind? Couldn't agree with each other, and they got really angry with each other. No, it's this, no, it's that. An anthropologist says, hey, the mind is something that happens in cultures. No, a neuroscientist says the mind is just the activity of the brain. And so the group is a lot of tension. And then the group ended for that day, and I was the one that asked them all to come. So during the ensuing week, I went for a long walk with myself on the beach, and walking is a good way for you to get some ideas. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? How can I phrase a definition of the mind that they might agree on? And here's a definition that I came up with on that walk on the beach that I offered to them that, amazingly, every single one of the 40 scientists agreed upon. Weird. If you've ever been with academics, a lot of us in this room are academics, you don't get academics to agree on anything, even what to have for lunch. So here they were agreeing on this definition, and this is a definition that's been unbelievably useful to formulate a new approach to mental health that we do in interpersonal neurobiology. So here's the definition that I offered back in that group. I'm not saying this is the correct definition. I'm not saying that other scientists have bought into this, because they haven't. I mean, in this group they did, but I'm not saying this is some widespread thing. It still remains, the word mind, an undefined entity in the different disciplines of science. You just need to know that, which is kind of shocking. I mean, I had someone with me, a graduate of a fancy university, graduate in cognitive neuroscience and psychology just a few months ago. So I said to him, this is fantastic. How many lectures did you have that define what the mind is? 0. Even at the level of an undergraduate, no one bothered to define it because no one defines it. So here it is. And you'll see how this relates to climate change issues in a moment. The mind, in our view, can be defined, and this means a working aspect of the mind. The mind, of course, has consciousness. It has subjective experience. It has thoughts and feelings, all that stuff. But one aspect of the mind, one core feature of the mind, can be defined as an embodied and relational emergent process. We're going to define each of these in a moment. An embodied and relational emergent process that regulates the flow of energy and information. So let me go through that step by step. An embodied and relational emergent process that regulates the flow of energy and information. The reason I'm taking time with this is because if we're having a conference called Climate, Mind, and Behavior, you're going to see that if you take this working definition and really play with it, there may be new ways of altering behavior to improve climate change issues. That's why we're taking the time to do this. So it's not just an academic discussion. So the embodied part means that the system we're looking at, because this is a systems view, is energy and information flow patterns. Okay? Energy is the capacity to do stuff. Information is basically a swirl of energy, a pattern of energy that has symbolic value. So if I go blah, 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 like that to you, there's not that much information. There are features to that, but there's not really information to it. It had a sound, it has waves, but it's not symbolic of anything. If I say Empire State Building, that has information in it. It's actually just energy flow of, air molecules moving, hitting your eardrum, and it's still energy flow, but it has symbolic value. So we're going to use the phrase energy and information flow, knowing that information is always energy. In fact, as you know from Einstein, E equals mc squared, everything is energy. Sometimes it's really condensed, we call it matter. So everything is energy. But here we're just going to be kind of qualifying. My daughter would say that's redundant, so I'm sorry. But anyway, energy and information flow. So the embodied part is that literally energy and information flow happens throughout the nervous system. So we're especially interested in the nervous system because it's designed evolutionarily to allow energy and information to flow. But here's the key thing. We are saying that the mind is not just about what happens in the brain. And this gets a lot of neuroscientists upset with me. Believe me, I've had lots of debates with them, because I'm saying the mind is not just an output of brain function. Sorry. If you study families like I do, I'm an attachment researcher, you know that the outcome of relationships is to change the way the mind develops. So what we're going to do here in this little diagram is put in one more word. Can you see back there? Can you guys see? We're going to put the word relationships up here. Relationships. Because we're saying that the mind, in fact, is an emergent process that arises as energy and information flow passes through the body. So it's a mechanism of flow in the body. That's how we're defining the brain. And it is then part of this triangle. We're going to make a triangle between mind, brain, and relationships. And that the brain is the mechanism of flow through the body. And what's a relationship? If the system we're looking at is energy and information flow patterns, like what's happening now between me and you, what is a relationship? A connection. And what's the connection made of? Like right now, between me and you, Jonathan. What's happening that allows this relationship to be established?
It's a mental connection.
Okay, it's a mental connection, but let's not define the mental with the mental, the word mental. It's an exchange of energy and information. Exactly. So we're going to define a relationship, whether it's a relationship with another person or your relationship with the planet. We're going to define relationship as the sharing of energy and information flow. Does that make sense? So we'll start with people-to-people relationships, but it's going to be all about our relationship as a species to our home, Earth. That the mind is not independent of how energy and information flow is being shared. So in this triangle, of course, we're doing what some philosophers say is a huge violation, right? We're separating, first of all, mind and brain, which gets people very agitated, and they say, you're reversing the progress of science. That was Descartes' error, after all, and separating mind and brain as if they're in different domains. So I want to be really clear, if you're aware of those arguments about that this is doing just the opposite. This isn't making it even not just dualism, but trioism. This is actually talking about three fundamental aspects of one reality. The one reality is energy and information flow. This describes three aspects of it, just like if you had a coin and said there's a heads and a tails, those are called primes. You don't try to reduce the head into the tail to the heads. That is a meaningless effort. In the same way, we're saying this is a triangle of human experience. The experience is energy and information flow, and one aspect is the sharing of energy and information flow, called relationship. The other is the mechanism of the flow through the body. So now we're saying, okay, got it. We're not dividing things up. We're not committing a philosophical error. We're actually now looking at something straight from science. This is the mathematics of systems. And the mathematics of systems that are open and capable of going chaotic, like we are as human beings, or like the planet is something called dynamical laws or complex system laws. And this is straight from a division of mathematics of probability theory, the division of probability theory called complexity theory. And what it says is that when there's an open system, receives stuff from outside of itself, like a cloud receives wind and sun forces, right? So the water molecules can also receive evaporating other molecules. So it's open, just like we are. And it's capable of chaotic behavior, like a cloud is or like we are. We call it a complex system. It has a couple of principles. One, it's nonlinear. That means small degrees of input could lead to large and unpredictable outputs, which has everything to do with climate, mind, and behavior. The nonlinearity of these systems we're talking about, that's number one. Number two, the system has an emergent process. This is straight out of science. I'm not making up that phrase. An emergent process. It's a property that arises from the interaction of elements of the system that is called self-organization. So what this proposal says is that the mind is the emergent self-organizing process that regulates the movement of energy and information flow. Everyone with me on that? Right? Emergent process is not some floozy little, California soft, let's hang out under pyramid statement. I want to be really clear about that. This is a straight out of mathematics. It's a scientific principle that elements in a system interact, and there's no programmer here. The interaction of the elements has a property that's called an emergent process. And the emergent process, we're going to take the bold statement, and I know this pisses off philosophers and scientists in psychology, and let me tell you, I don't have that many friends, so I hope I'll make some friends this week. Because this definition of mind, this core aspect of the mind that I'm offering you, you won't see it anywhere. It's freaky. But I'm telling you, after almost 100,000 sampling, none of my colleagues in mental health have a definition of the mind. People in psychology don't, and people in philosophy don't. So I just want you to have informed consent. I'm giving you an interpersonal neurobiology view. This is our statement, that we see the mind as a part of energy and information flow, okay? So this is a triangle, basically, of energy and information flow. And these are 3 primes of that flow. Mind is the emergent process that regulates the flow. Relationships are the sharing of the flow. Brain is the embodied mechanism of the flow. These are not 3 different domains of reality or something like that. This is one reality. So if we're thinking about climate, mind, and behavior then, our challenge is to say, okay, well, how in the world does the structure of the brain, for example, just to start there, how does that contribute to behavior, right? Because ultimately behavior is driven by energy and information flow patterns. That's what drives us. So we want to know, how is the structure of those connections made? And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But we also want to understand that the way a person embraces the context in which they live, in other words, how they embed a sense of self relationally, or do I say, I'm a solo operator on the planet? We're going to get into that in a moment, but just to give you why this is so important. If I say the self is defined as this body, then I could just use up all the resources on the planet, and why would I give a hoot? Right? And in fact, we know that when you have a sense of self that's separate, right, what do? If you know there are limited resources, you gather them up for you and your family as much as you can, because you don't know when they're going to run out. You don't actually try to help out the bigger picture. So part of what we're going to explore right now is, how does this system come up with a concept like self? And what I'm going to suggest to you as just a take-home message, and then we'll work our way to the reasoning behind it, is that if the self is defined as a singular noun, the planet is cooked. But if we can be really creative collectively and find a way to develop in this generation, and absolutely the next generation that takes over the stewardship of the planet, that the self, in fact, is a plural verb, so that we can allow kids to be raised to know that I am more than me. And I am connected to you, but I'm a member of we. So I'm more than me, I'm connected to you, and I'm a member of we. will have a different outcome. Because then caring for the planet is not something you have to scare people into doing. It's not something, that's the fear tactic, which apparently didn't work in climate change issues. It's not just about informing them, because if you inform someone who has an idea of a self that's separate, look, the resources are used up, they'll just use up more. Or they'll say, that's irritating, don't bother me with your ideas, or your ideas are some left-wing, ridiculous kind of thing. I don't need to be bothered by that junk. You're just trying to, bother me. Me, right? So the issue is to go deeply into the brain and relationships to understand how this emergent process called mind actually is shaped by this interaction of relationships and the brain. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. And I know there may be lots of questions, but luckily we're going to do a reflective period and then have time for questions. So, let me just check, just informationally, is there any clarifying point before we dive into some of the details of this? Yes?
I'm just wondering whether the triangle was, in some sense, misleading. It suggests the system's not open. It suggests a kind of binary to the three-part system you've shown us. You said it's one system, but on the other hand, it's open. It seems a little tense, just like wondering if you don't hack them.
Sure. Well, energy and information flow, of course, is going to happen from outside of this system that would define, in some ways, the person's beginnings, or what they're flowing in. But because energy and information flow is relational, these relationships, of course, are outside of the bodily self. So this part of the triangle is profoundly open, right? Just by definition, you would say this is the sharing of energy information flow with things outside of the body. So that could be with anything. It could be a walk through nature. It could be how you relate to your mom, how you relate to your spouse. I mean, it could. So here's the open part, right there. For sure, it's a great question because it absolutely is an open system. Yes.
Perhaps you're going to talk about it a bit later. But where does action or behavior come from the mind? It's not enough to have information energy flow, but there has to be an action based on that information flow to maintain and sustain the flow of information and energy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we'll get into that for sure. Yes?
What about the concept of awareness?
The concept of awareness. So we're going to get into that too. So remember, the mind, of course, has awareness. It has choice and action. The whole debate about free will we can put in there too, about and the idea of intention turning into action. So this way of defining this one aspect of mind, the regulatory aspect of mind, is not about saying the unanswerable question: what is awareness? For example, if this were a different thing, if this were called climate consciousness and behavior, then I would be up here saying, no one has any idea what consciousness is. I mean, I can give you all sorts of guesses about it, that I've written about, but, they're fun things to talk about. And in fact, we may do an exercise if we have some time during the week where I can walk you through a reflective practice that gets you to a possible answer to that. And maybe we can find a time to do that in ways that just, when I do it with people, it's kind of a mind-blowing thing. I keep on getting emails from everybody, oh my God, we did that thing. So we can actually address that from an experiential point of view. But let's just hold that for a moment. So let me just give you kind of an overview so everyone is together on these elements. So let's start with the brain, but realizing we've taken the step of defining the emergent process of mind as a regulatory process that is and monitoring and modifying. This is the thing I want to make sure to say here. It's when you regulate a car, for example, you have to monitor where you're going. You have to have your eyes open, and you modify it by changing the steering wheel and moving the steering wheel, pressing on the brakes, pressing on the accelerator. The same thing is true with the regulatory process of mind. It has to be able to monitor energy and information flow and modify it. So part of the idea of awareness or making people's behavior different is going to involve altering the capacity of the mind in children, let's say, teenagers, in people in society, to monitor energy and information flow in a different way and then modify it. And the modification is what leads to the behavioral change. So without awareness, people are on automatic pilot. With awareness, the possibility of choice and change is brought into the system. And so this is one of the reasons in every form of psychotherapy, no matter their warring status with each other, they all use awareness without exception. And I'm often asked to give talks at each of their big international meetings, and I give this triangle thing, whatever, and they say, oh, yeah, that explains what we do. Well, every single therapy uses awareness. So awareness takes the mind's ability to monitor and modify and puts choice in there so change can happen. So the reason when you hear Paul and Jonathan talk about the notion of reflection, even in our 3-day conference together, it's that awareness brings the mind to a place that goes beneath automatic pilot and allows new combinations to be created. So at a very minimum, even though we don't know what the subjective texture of awareness really is, I mean, it's I think the most fascinating question in the world. And I said it to my publisher when I was publishing the Mindsight book, and there was silence on the other end of the phone. I said, isn't that the most amazing question? What's the connection between your mental subjective experience of awareness and the brain's firing patterns? And she didn't say anything. She said, not many people are interested in that, so don't make that be your main theme of this book. But to me, that's the most fascinating thing. Like the physical property of neurals firing and the mental subjective experience of awareness and the texture of things, that's just incredible. Anyway, so at least from our point of view of climate-minded behavior, awareness is important because it gives the opportunity for this regulatory process to drop beneath automatic pilot and then make new combinations so that behavior is different. Okay. So, yes?
So, are you saying that mind regulates brain processes and relationships connect? Is it that?
Yeah, so let's look at that. So we're talking about energy and information flow and defining that. Energy is the capacity to do stuff. Information is a swirl of energy, symbolic value. Flow is movement across time. Relationships, sharing of energy information flow between the individual you're talking about, whose mind you're referring to, and everything outside of itself. So it could be another human being, it could be a group, it could be a whole population, it could be the planet. I mean, so there's different ways, but it's sharing. And then brain is the neural mechanism through all these interconnected neurons of energy and information flow. So one thing that comes from this is exactly what you're saying. The mind can change the structure of the brain. We used to say that in the 90s, and people thought we were wacko. Now we have the absolute evidence, some of it collected every summer here at the Mind and Life Institute summer meetings at the Garrison Institute, in this very room, where reports are showing over and over and over again, when you teach people to use awareness, I'm going to use some terms that need to be put in our vocabulary, to intentionally focus attention in a certain way, you change not just the function of the brain, but you change its structure. We used to say that it probably is true. Now we say it's absolutely true.
Can you say that sentence again?
Yeah.
Are
When,
you differentiating between awareness and attention?
well, let me get into that in a moment. So let me just get these two questions. So just to repeat myself, then I'll get to your important question. So what we're saying is that the intentional focus of attention gets the brain to change not only the way it functions, but it changes its structure. Intention and attention are mental processes. So the shorthand way of saying that is the mind changes the structure of the brain. No doubt about it. So that's number one. That's not a hypothesis, that's established fact. Now, the important question about what's awareness, what's attention? Attention is just a term that's very important for climate, mind, and behavior because attention is a general term that means that which directs energy and information flow. From a cognitive science point of view, that's what it means. So you could say the mind is attention because we've kind of defined the mind as the process that regulates energy information flow. So you say, okay, that's cool. Now, some attention is not within awareness. So in other words, it's called, the formal name for that is non-focal attention. That's the word for it. So always you're scanning all sorts of things about the environment without you having that within awareness. Attention, the direction of energy information flow, that's in awareness is called focal attention. So then you can say, what's the difference between focal attention and awareness? Well, they're kind of describing the same sort of thing, but focal attention specifically refers to the focus, the direction of energy information flow within awareness. But awareness has not only that, it also has something called the qualia, or the subjective texture. When you see red and I see red within awareness, that's a subjective quality of consciousness that we can never know is your red the same as my red. So we know we're both paying attention to red because we've chosen red out of the blue and green and blue, whatever. So we know our focal attention is the same, but the quality is not the same. Awareness includes focal. You see what I mean? I hope I'm describing it well. So even when it comes to someone taking their trash and bringing it to the bin, and do they put it in the recycle pot or do they stick it in the trash pot, that's all about attention. And if they're on automatic pilot and they're just used to shoving it in the trash, not the recycling bin, you haven't gotten their attention, literally, the focus of energy information flow, to turn the movement of their body, which is another form of energy information flow, by the way, and take their arm and move it to the left to stick it in the recycle bin. Doesn't cost a penny, but they have to be paying attention. So if their non-focal attention is on automatic pilot, and you have not influenced their minds, which is what attention is all about, to consider, in fact, sticking it in the recycle bin is important for we, because I am we. And if it's just about me, why would I care? So we haven't done our job, right? So that's just to get to the practical aspect of your important question. So the question is, how do we do that? In climate, mind, and behavior, you're all agents of change. And I feel so honored to be here with you because you are doing the work that's going to make it so the next generations can live on this magnificent planet and have life, which is such a gift to be given. So I feel just very grateful and humbled to be here with you. And if there's anything I can offer during these 3 days we're going to hang around together, grab me and let's talk, because I don't know anything really about climate change issues, which is what you know about. So if there's anything that my life's work has been working on that can help you, I'm here all the time. So please just grab me anywhere. So what I'm going to do now is just share with you just the groundwork about how do you make actions in all the different work you do, supplying funding for programs that can not only find better ways of course, having sustainability and finding ways to capture energy from the sun and all that stuff, but how do you capture energy from humans? So they direct their attention in ways that actually support sustainability and reduce waste and all the things that you know about. So let me just walk you through the basics so we're all kind of on the same plane of understanding. And so here's how it goes. Each cell of the body has a set of genes, and genes are really important in utero. After the sperm and egg get together, and just to give you in a nutshell, the sperm and egg get together, a single cell becomes 2 cells, 4 cells, 8, 16, etc. And pretty soon the glob that is the conceptus is so big, some cells are on the inside and some are on the outside. So they're differentiating. This becomes very important. Now, if you notice where my fingernails are, when they bend in like this, that's going to be the source of the nervous system. The nervous system is basically specialized skin cells, ectoderm. Now, I only bring that up here to say that the skin is the interface between the inner and the outer. And the origin of the nervous system is to always interface the inner and the outer. So that's going to be a theme that may be helpful in thinking about climate, mind, and behavior, because it's always about the inner and the outer. And as you'll see, the brain itself is incredibly social. And yet modern culture makes it so we're just like isolated, which is not what the nervous system evolved to do. The nervous system evolved to be interconnected, allowing energy and information flow to be within a community. So we live in this very odd modern world. Very strange. Even just the way children are raised in single homes. Read Sarah Hurdy's magnificent book, mothers and others. We were never evolved to be so isolated. All right, so anyway, you have the differentiation of the nervous system. It grows. Genetics, really, really important. Determines stuff like temperament, which determines all sorts of proclivities we have. Temperament is really important. The brain, because it's so underdeveloped at birth, basically, to do it really quickly, if you put your thumb in the middle and put your fingers over the top, this would be a pretty handy model of the brain. My daughter says never say that, but I just said it, sorry. And it goes like this, where the spinal cord is here, right? If you lift your fingers up, lift your thumb up, the brain stem, which regulates bodily processes, first to develop here. So at birth, it's well developed. Then you put your thumb over, 200 million years ago, unlike the 300 million-year-old brain stem, which has the fight, flight, freeze response as well. We'll get into that in a moment. The limbic area developed about 200 million years ago. It allows all sorts of things like emotions, the appraisal of meaning, generates fear, it distinguishes different kinds of memory, and it allows attachment relationships to form. 200 million years of being attached to our caregivers. Then if you put your fingers over the top, this is also a mammalian invention, the more elaborated cortex, especially in the front in primates. So it's like this. Basically, the cortex is about making maps of all sorts of things. The back, in general, is for mapping out the exterior world. This first part of the frontal lobe, from your second knuckles downward, maps out what you do in terms of the question of action. This is literally where you turn neural processes into action, is this motor strip. There's a premotor area and a motor strip that gets your body to behave. So that's the neural area of that. And then from your last knuckles downward is your prefrontal cortex. Very elaborated in human beings, right behind your forehead. And in a nutshell, this side part allows you to have focal attention. It's called the dorsolateral, just think of side. And the middle part integrates everything together. And just for those of you who know the names, we won't ever have to repeat them. This would be the orbital frontal behind the eyes, the medial prefrontal up and down, the dorsal and ventral parts, and the ventrolateral. So it's midline this way. We'll just call it middle, and the anterior cingulate. Basically, these work together as a team. Just remember, this is middle prefrontal. And there's a whole range of functions, everything from regulating your body, attuning to other people, and maybe even the planet. Regulating your emotions. So if some film comes out about climate change and you're scared and you don't know how to regulate your emotions, you'll just have a behavioral withdrawal. That's scary. I don't need to deal with that. So people who don't have a well-developed area here will just withdraw from challenging things and not approach them. Crucial issue for what we're talking about. A fourth thing, so we have emotional balance, we've got attuned communication, we have regulating your body. We also have the ability to extinguish fear. So you say, yeah, there's all sorts of horrible things like we're going to hear about later tonight. How do you calm your fear and then turn yourself into action rather than just withdrawal? If you can't take these inner things that are literally, hundreds of millions of years old, there's a drive to say, if you're scared of something, go away from it. We have not evolved to take the kind of information we're about to hear tonight and stay present with it. That's not a natural thing. Everything in our entire survival toolkit says, if there's something scary, get away from it. I mean, we've got to be, empathic for why human beings, when they hear this frightening stuff, say, I'd rather watch TV. You in this room are a unique breed. You're saying, I see the danger and I go toward it. That's unusual. So we need to figure out a way to support this change of mind so people can do it. So extinguishing fear. There's something called response flexibility, which means how do you pause before you act? How do you pause and say, I put it in the recycling bin? Response flexibility is the fifth thing. Then the others include insight into yourself, which means I know where I've been, I know who I am now, and I know where I'm going. That's like a mind-sight map of me. Right? Very important. No one's saying we should get rid of a sense of me and just dissolve me. No, no, no. Me is really important. There's also a mind-sight map that makes empathy, makes a map of you, what's going on inside of you. Then the eighth process is morality. This region, the same region of the brain, is responsible for thinking about the larger good, the greater good. And if you will, this is where you make a mind-sight map of we. So you have a mindset map of me, you, and we. And this gives us a sense of, yes, the right thing to do. The way to promote health on the planet is the right thing to do because I am we. If there isn't that mindset map of me, if you don't go from me to we, why would anyone do anything for the greater good? Why? There'd be no reason. There'd be no motivation to make action, to make behaviors driven by that. So in terms of where behavior comes from this, what's called a top-down mapping, which filters all perception, right? So just to give you that phraseology, top-down means things you've learned filter what you perceive and how you act. That's called top-down. Bottom-up means you're seeing things in a new way, in a raw way that comes upward, and you may be able to have new combinations. What we want to do, I want to suggest to you, is introduce a learning where people have a sense of identity as we. So that behaviors, which are ultimately what we're going to talk about, are driven by this built-in map that I am we. If you're hurting, I'm going to help you because we are together. I don't do it to impress somebody else. I do it because it's the right thing to do. If you realize your home is a mess, you clean up your home. If you realize you shared all the air with everyone on the planet and that the earth is our common home, and you got rid of this issue we aren't even talking about of, the in-group and the out-group. And so when I'm under threat, of course, what the brain does, if I'm under threat, is I figure out who's like me, and I gather them around me, and I protect them. And if there's someone not like me, like another country or another ethnic group, or I actually treat them with more hostility. There's all sorts of things like that. So when we understand, in fact, that the brain, yes, is shaped by genetics, but after birth, when the baby's born, the cortex, which is having all these maps, is extremely underdeveloped. And the experiences that children have in their families, the way people relate to them, shapes the structure of the brain. And in our view, in interpersonal neurobiology, what we say is that when relationships are integrative means the linkage of differentiated parts. Because notice I haven't suggested to you what a healthy mind is, which I'm about to do right now, and then close this talk right on time. A healthy mind, in our view, again, this is our definition of the mind, so no, it comes from this one field of consilience, of looking at all these different disciplines of science. We define a healthy mind as a mind that's able to move the system of energy and information flow toward integration. And in a nutshell, if I can just take 3 extra minutes, Jonathan. In a nutshell, through a long line of reasoning, what we surmise from looking at the various sciences is that the linkage of differentiated parts is what defines integration. That's just a way of defining this term integration. Differentiated parts. So that is the definition of integration. Now, this is now, a whole day's talk in 3 minutes, but here we go. When a system is integrated, whether that system is the body, linking the left and right hemisphere, which are very different from each other, linking the bottom and the top, which are very different from each other, linking different memory systems, or relationships. Let's talk about parent-child relationships. When a parent honors the difference between himself and, let's say, his daughter, but promotes linkages, compassionate communication, that's basically the quickest summary of a secure, healthy attachment. And here's the take-home message. First of all, when relationships are integrative, the brain becomes integrated. I know that sounds unbelievably simple, but every bit of evidence suggests it's true. When the sharing of energy and information flow honors differences and promotes linkages, quickly summarizes integrated. The circuits in the brain are integrated. And if you take your hand model out, for example, just as one example, take your hand model out, take a look at this middle prefrontal area we've been talking about, right here, your middle fingernails. If you lift it up and put it down, you'll notice that it actually is not only connected to the cortex, of which it's a part, it connects to the limbic area, the brainstem, stuff from the body, and even signals from other people's nervous systems. So the social, the somatic, the brainstem, the limbic, and the cortical are all brought into a functional whole by this integrative region. And what we say is that when relationships between a parent and a child are integrative, when this energy and information flow is honoring differences and promoting linkages, it actually stimulates the growth of integrative fibers. Now, we used to say that in the 90s, and it was a hypothesis. And now we have actually, the technology is advanced, so you can show actual findings like that. Out of Harvard by Marty Teicher, you look at his work, that support that. So when a system is not integrated, here's the amazing thing, and this, you can tell me how this works with the planet that you know about. Integration is like harmony, but when you're not integrated, what does that look like? That looks like chaos outside of that, and the other way outside is rigidity. Now, you're going to have to teach me about this in terms of climate change issues, but for mental health issues, this diagram you see on the chart here, chaos and rigidity, amazingly explains the entire psychiatrist's Bible of mental disorders. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, even though it has no framework for health and no framework even for how the disorders are related to each other, in our view, and this is what a lot of my work is lately, is to try to transform the field of mental health, chaos and rigidity explain every single symptom of every syndrome in the DSM. And our view is that that's because health is integration, and impaired health is impaired integration. And so you see chaos and rigidity, and then the key is, for us in mental health, this is what the Mindsight book is all about, is how do you promote the linkage of differentiated parts? So what I would suggest to you is that when a human being is raised in a culture where the self is differentiated but not linked, when they're not connected in communities, when they have what Einstein called the optical delusion of separateness, and not this widening of a circle of compassion that he talked about. That is an affront to the integration of that individual into the global world. It's a form of illness. And so if our secular ethic that we're trying to promote is health, and we take on the possible explanation that health is integration, you can then encourage people from the earliest days of parenting, of education, of kids working to say, my God, life is meaningless. And you say, yeah, studies show that to get a sense of meaning in life, you have to be interconnected with others and communities. To get a sense of wisdom, happiness, health, longevity, just look at any of those studies. It's all about your sense of being connected to something larger than a bodily defined self. So what I want to leave you with is this. I think there's incredible hope for a third wave of how to approach climate change issues. And that is to help people from the earliest days when they come out of the womb, to preschool, to school years, to college, to realize that the self is not just living in your body, that the self, in fact, is a plural verb. And the great news is it's win-win-win all around. You will help the planet while you help people find meaning in life and find health throughout their relationships, their bodies, and their mental worlds. So I think the time is now, and I'm so honored to be here with you to make it a reality. Thank you so much for your attention.